Welcome to my YouTube channel, One Race, the Human Race, All Human. Today is Saturday, October 23rd, 2021. Republican Party already made it clear and got rid of the filibuster when it comes to judicial nominations, Supreme Court. You need a simple majority. As important as Supreme Court is to this nation, and they made it a simple majority, then you can make voting rights simple majority and passing other legislation simple majority. Makes sense.
That democracy can continue.
And speaking of democracy, Professor Haynes, this is Senator Angus King, who only recently came around to the filibuster reform. He was on Rachel Maddow earlier this week. Here's what he said about that. Watch.
You can get 41 votes out of the current Senate, which was enough to block any legislation. And if you take the states that those 41 senators represent, add all the population together, you get 24% of the American people. So the situation we're in now is that 24% of the American people have an effective veto over anything that 76% of the American people think is important public policy. I don't think that squares with democratic theory.
So, Professor, what do you make of Senator King's argument there? How does the Senate today and the use of the filibuster square up with what the founders intended? Because as we just heard from the senator there, 41 votes is all it takes, and they represent nearly 26% of the population. That is by no means a functioning democracy when that minority population can block the will of 76% or 75% or what have you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Eamon, for having me here tonight. The founders wanted our Congress to consider these types of legislation in a very deliberate way, especially in the Senate. But it's a popular myth that the filibuster was a piece of that story there. The filibuster was never part of the original Constitution. And in a lot of ways, it was just an accident that it came about. Vice President Aaron Burr just suggested getting rid of the previous question motion, which allowed senators or House members currently to cut debate with a simple majority. In a lot of ways, I think, there's a lot of misinformation about what went on, what the founders intended. They intended for a lot of deliberation, for consideration, but they did not intend, I believe, for stonewalling.
Really quickly, Professor, how do you counter the argument made by some Republicans that, or at least some critics of the filibuster, who say that if the Democrats do away with it now, Republicans will come into power in 2, 4, 6 years from now and completely undo everything, whether it is shoring up voting rights for minorities or climate change or anything else that the Democrats try to pass now. It just makes it that much more vulnerable to repeal once the Democrats lose power.
It's a very interesting argument, but that process has already started. In 2013 and 17, we've already done away with, we've already carved out exceptions for executive nominations and for judicial nominees to be able to pass by simple majority votes. The Republicans and Mitch McConnell have made it very clear that this is something that they probably would not think twice about doing. And so to not act for fear that the Republicans would do the same, it almost seems as if the Republicans are going to do it anyway.
So to that extent, Alicia, how concerned are you that if the Democrats do in fact pass voter protection laws and voting rights laws that don't have bipartisan support, then simply 4 years from now, 2 years from now, if they lose control, those things are just going to get thrown out the window and we're right back to square one? The argument is do the harder work now, try to build that bipartisan support, and then you can ultimately get a meaningful piece of legislation that both sides believe and would endure.
Well, I think two things on this piece. Number one, what we know is that when you win real things for real people, your party stays in power. And that has always been the key ticket for Democrats to stay in power and to get power. And what we need to see moving forward is them doing just that, win real things for real people. That way, midterm elections aren't going to be that much of an anxiety-producing process for you because you know that you've delivered on the promises that you put out during your campaigning. But the second issue here that I think is really important is that I think what we're not taking into account when we start talking about bipartisanship is that actually the parties have changed drastically over the last decade. This is not the Republican Party of the 1990s. This Republican Party has gone to extremes and has become an extremist party. And so essentially what you're trying to do is find middle ground between extreme and the center. And that's going to be a much harder process to accomplish, especially when you're not focused on winning real things for real people. That's why at the Black to the Future Action Fund, we're calling on Congress and we're calling on the Biden-Harris administration to take bold action or prepare to go home. That is literally what we can expect in 2022, unless the voters that turned out in 2020 start to see some concrete results and material changes in our lives.
Let's talk a little bit about this administration, Alicia, because earlier this year, the New York Times reported White House officials and close allies of the president expressed confidence that it's possible to out-organize voter suppression. A lot of people think that is not accurate, that it's not possible to do that. Have you heard that message from the White House? Do you feel that organizations like yours are on their own to solve this issue at the state level? And is it even possible to out-organize voter suppression laws in this country?
It is not possible to out-organize voter suppression laws in this country, just to be frank. What it is possible to do, right, is to flex the power that Black voters handed to you to get you in the position of power that you're in right now. And I think when we start to say things like out-organize voter suppression at the state level, essentially what we're doing is punting the ball. What we have to do is make sure that we're winning real things for real people, and it starts with voting rights. If people do not have the ability to make decisions and weigh in on the decisions that shape their lives every single day, that is exactly where we start to see the erosion of democracy. When we look at state legislatures across the country, we have to understand that the conservative movement has far out-organized us. And in fact, they have a majority of control in state houses across the nation. It's up to the federal government and it's up to the president to set the tone for what is going to be the bedrock of democracy in this nation. And we can't keep punting the ball down the field. And in fact, that's exactly how we got Donald Trump. We started to punt the ball down the field and talk about how it wasn't that big of a deal, how we needed to listen to all sides. And that's how we got here right now. Somebody has to tell the truth and somebody's got to set the tone. That's what we've done with the Build Back Bolder mandate. And that's what the president needs to do. He needs to make good on the promises that he made to our communities and to voters across the nation. But he also needs to set the tone for what democracy is going to look like and how this country is going to run. And unfortunately, he's falling short of that right now.
Professor Haynes, one more to you, and it's a point that Alicia brought up, and that has to do with the state legislators. Is it a little bit too late, even if you do away with the filibusters and you pass some type of voting rights act, is it too late given where the Supreme Court has already come down on this and the way that state legislators are redrawing maps at the same time passing these restrictive voter laws, that voting rights in this country are being eroded, and that what is on the table right now is just simply not enough to preserve our democracy and to undo all the damage that's been done?
In a lot of ways, what's proposed in the Freedom to Vote Act is just a bare minimum of what is probably necessary to combat what's going on out there in terms of voter suppression. A lot of damage has been done, especially by Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts' decision to eviscerate the Voting Rights Act and especially pre-clearance position there. It really is problematic what is going on. It's necessary, I believe, for our Congress to level with what the Supreme Court was saying, which was go ahead and legislate voting rights. And the only way to do that at this point is to modify the filibuster, is to modify standing precedent of the Senate rules and allow for majority votes, carve-outs for things like voting legislation and election legislation.
Yeah, we've been trying to ring the alarm bells, at least on this show, that the biggest threat to our democracy right now in getting anything done, and certainly the things to preserve our democracy like voting rights, is the filibuster. That's why we wanted to put the spotlight on it today and have both of you on. Alicia Garza, Chris Haynes, thank you so much for your time. Coming up, a Republican delegation is going to the UN Climate Summit for the first time. But what is their actual true motivation? Plus, 5 military veterans advising Senator Kristen Sinema resign this week. We're going to tell you what's behind their change of heart.